Hello, it's Thursday morning. That means Garland, Nixon, and Scott Ritter. Lots to talk about. Certainly, Ukraine, in the Middle East, etc. And we got a great event coming up in New York City that we want to tell you about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. And oh my gosh, Zelensky has a peace plan. There's a big BRICS meeting in what is it? Kazakhstan, is that? Whatever the
Kazan.
heck. Kazan. Yeah, there we go. I knew it was something started with a K and it was in Eurasia. But before we get to that, and of course, what's going on in Israel, you name it, update on what's happening on the front. But let's start here. Scott, for those of you who've already looked at the thumbnail, it's Operation Dawn Brunch. Let's talk about all of the who's going to be there, what it is, and how you, listeners and viewers, hopefully in the area, or maybe even not, you might want to fly in or drive in, can be there in New York City and meet all of the great guests. Scott.
Well, we're taking advantage of a program that's taking place the night before and Saturday. Diane Sayre and Jose Vega will be hosting an event, and I looked at the lineup. I'm invited to speak, but I was looking at the others, yourself and others who are going to be there, and I'm like, we got all this talent there. Why not take advantage of it? And so together with the Eisenhower Media Center, Larry Wilkinson, Dennis Fritz, Matt Ho, we decided, if people are spending the night, if they're coming to New York City and they're going to be spending the night, why not offer them a brunch the next morning? And why not turn the brunch into an event? Why don't we gather everybody together and hold some world-class panels to talk about the issues of the day? And two that jump out are the threat of nuclear war and the assault on free speech. And it just so happened that there's this great venue, the Tudor Steakhouse, that was available. Yeah, I mean, this is a world-class facility now we have world-class panels, and we've come together, and so that's that was the concept, and everything has fallen into place. We've got it. We've got Larry Wilkerson, Dennis Fritz, we've got yourself, we've got me. We have Danny Haiphong is going to be there. We've got
Jimmy Dore, Russell Dobular.
Jimmy Dore is going to be there. Russell, I can't pronounce his last name. That was the one that was Russell.
The New Dissidents guy. That's all that I know him.
Mr. New Dissidents. Yeah. And I'm going to try and get on his show to help promote this, so I better learn his name. Jeff Norman, Diane Sayre, Jose Vega. I mean, this is the people who are I would say on the front lines of alternative media and discussing these issues and other issues as well. And so we put that together. You can buy tickets at scottritter.com. The cost is $100, and people might say, that's first of all, the brunch is you're getting $60 plus tax and gratuity, so about a $70 value there for a New York City brunch in downtown Manhattan. Put on by a world-class facility. You'll also get, we're going to give everybody who comes one of these Operation Dawn challenge coins. That's a $20 value, and so for a $10 overhead, which is what it is, a $10 overhead, you have the opportunity to get this wonderful panel discussions, and the panels will each run about an hour. And built into that will be an opportunity for questions to be asked by the audience. So, it's a participation event. So if you want to come and have great food, great company, great discussions, empower yourself with knowledge and information, and have a chance for some interaction, there'll be a table there. So those of the panelists who have books, the books will be there for sale, and you can get the autographs. It's just a good deal. And so I would encourage everybody to come. There's 120 seats available, and last time I checked, they're going. So what's the old thing? If you it's best to strike while the iron's hot. If you wait, you might be left behind.
Yeah.
So scottritter.com, right at the top of the banner there is where you can go learn more about the event and purchase the ticket.
All right. Also, go to scottritter.com for all of Scott's good work. And you can make sure while you're there, you may not be able to go. You may be in another part of the world, whatever. Make sure that you donate to help Scott continue that his good work. You see all my stuff going across the bottom. Buy me a coffee and all that stuff. If you can, certainly follow me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee or something. That's highly appreciated. Everybody there's working hard. And let's just say it doesn't pay. There's not high pay pushing back against the government, right? It's you always save money for legal fees.
Well, these days, yes. Two things. One, we are going to be recording it. We have a videographer there, which explains some of the overhead, the video guy, the sound guy, things of that nature. But we will package it. I have a graphic team. We're going to take the videos. We're going to adapt, and then we're going to get them out there too for people to watch. The idea is to empower people with knowledge and information. So people who can't make it, the panel discussion will be made available a couple days after the event. And then I just want to point out what Garland just said. And Garland, you can talk about it yourself, but Sputnik Radio has been compelled to shut down by the United States government. This is a frontal assault on free speech. And Garland and Wilmer Leon had a very good programming on Sputnik Radio, and it's now not available to us. But it's not just that we've been denied this wonderful forum to learn from. It cuts off an income stream to Garland and Wilmer, and now more than ever. People need to go on to Garland's Patreon and everything and support. This is the time when Garland needs it. As he looks at options and looks to expand out and continue his work, his important work, he also needs to pay the bills. And now more than ever,
get kind of dark in here.
He can't afford the electricity. This is going to be shut down. So we smile about it, but this is as deadly serious as it gets. I remember when I got kicked off of YouTube, lost 80% of my income right there. Bam. And while yes, you can rebuild and you can move on, that takes time. And in that interim time, bills keep coming. So now more than ever, if you're here watching this, that means that you like what Garland does. Now more than ever is the time to say, I'm gonna donate. I'm going to subscribe. I'm going to donate. I'm going to do what it can. It's not about begging, guys. It's about earning a living. This is the reality. None of this happens for free. You get to watch it for free, perhaps, but none of what goes into making this happens for free. Life is life, and life is expensive. Just the reality of it. And Garland needs and deserves all of our support right now. So that's my pitch for Garland.
Thank you very much, Scott. All right, so let's get to the big stories. Number one, weird things going on in that Zelensky's pitching this, the so-called peace plan, which is just again, the foolishness, the absurdity. Certainly, I think he's got to deal with the lunatics that are around him that could at any time decide that his rule has come to an end, and I'm certainly that's a factor. Joe Biden, he's going to go to Ramstein. They're going to have a big meeting, then they cancel it. What are your thoughts on and I've heard some EU people saying, perhaps it's time to get a deal here. They got a disaster on their hands in Ukraine. What's your thoughts on the current state of this discussion of ending it, which in my opinion, they can't do anyway, but go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, we got garbage men coming out front and the dogs are crazy, but the dangers of live podcasting. look, we're in the end game of this Ukrainian tragedy. Ukraine has lost this war. My dogs agree that Ukraine has lost this war. I apologize for this, guys. I mean, I could turn off the camera and go and try and silence them, or we can try and continue this conversation. But
if you want to, yeah, go. Wait a minute. I think they took the cue. Oh, you scared them when you said, all right, I'm going to go deal with these guys. You're like, hurry up, quick, be quiet. We're getting ready to get it.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks like the little one just keeps going because he's like,
it's always the little ones. You ever notice that? The little ones are
always the tiniest one that's stirring up the pot. But it looks like the garbage men have done their thing and have left, and the dogs have calmed down. So I mean, this is like Scott here has 2 strikes against him already. I overstayed at the gym. I was trying to explain to Garland why I was late. I got on a machine at Planet Fitness late, and sorry. And now my dogs are acting up. So one more strike, Garland's like, the hell with you, man. I'm finding somebody who could do a better job. No, but on Ukraine, this is the end. I mean, it's over. No, there's not a rational person out there, even the most steadfast supporter of Ukraine. Nobody's sitting there going, yeah, Ukraine's got. Even Ukraine acknowledges we're going to have to look for some sort of deal that trades territory for peace. They recognize that we're not going to be returning our. I mean, they had an interview with a Ukrainian brigade commander the other day who said, yeah, the problem with talking about going back to the 1991 borders is we're going to the wrong borders, meaning that if this continues, Russia is going to take Ukraine to the 1991 Soviet borders, and there won't be an independent Ukraine. And so there's recognition about this amongst the Ukrainian leadership. Now there's talk about this, even their European allies. People who said we're going to stand with you till the end. Well, the end's here, and the idea of continuing to throw good money after bad to try and change an outcome that isn't going to get any better. It's just going to get worse over time. But you have Zelensky running around with this with his peace plan, and it's a joke. It's a literal fantasy. It's fiction. It won't happen, and it's actually disruptive to the process because it requires people who would otherwise dedicate resources to maybe move towards peaceful resolution to now address his issues, and there's politics involved, and so you in order to assuage hurt feelings, you have to continue to put money into it. That's what the United States is doing. We're putting in $465 million. It's amazing how we continue to find money to give to Ukraine, and yet the people of Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, no money for you. So it's it's a tragedy, but we are at the end game, and then the other reality is coming in. I don't know I know Moscow had a freak snowstorm the other day, snow on the ground in Moscow. But if you study the history of Russia, we're getting to the time of year where it gets cold and snow, and Ukraine also gets cold and there's snow. 90% of Ukraine's thermal power generation capability is gone, and it won't come back. Not before winter. And if the Russians want to, they can shut down the remaining 10%. And they've already guaranteed that this is going to be a horrible winter for the Ukrainians, a horrible winter that's going to have, a negative, destructive impact on Ukraine socially, economically, politically. The 3 factors that we don't talk about when we talk about the battlefield. Ukraine is getting wiped out on the battlefield right now. Kursk, the Russians are getting to the point where they're going to encircle the Ukrainian forces that are in Kursk, guaranteeing they can't retreat. They're all going to die or surrender. That's it. That's their fate. So the elite strategic reserves of Ukraine are gone, eliminated. On the battlefield in the Donbass, Russia's advancing across the board in Kupiansk and Kharkov. They're advancing down in Zaporizhia. They're advancing, and Russia's bringing up more reserves. We keep talking about these numbers that the Russians have, and they're coming in. So there's going to be a winter offensive, and Ukraine's got nothing to protect itself. We're talking about giving them more F-16s as if that's Australia's promised 400 M1 tanks, but they're not saying that they're all broke. at the end of their service life, they can't, the engines won't start. That's why we're getting rid of them. But here, Ukraine, we'll give them to you, as if you're doing Ukraine any favors at that point in time. It's all over but the dying, and unfortunately, there's a lot of dying left. But we're at the stage right now where people literally have to start telling Ukraine no, and telling Zelensky no, and doing it harshly. The time for putting a bandage on hurt feelings is over. This is you're getting to the point now where the West needs to manage the collapse of Ukraine, or else it will resonate. I mean, the collapse of Ukraine, the defeat. Understand what this will do to NATO, the shock to NATO of acknowledging the defeat, because now NATO will have to deal with the propagandized rhetoric that they've been throwing out there for so long about Russia's going to keep coming and all this stuff. And then when Ukraine collapses and people realize, well, Russia ain't coming, it's not going to be there. Now, first of all, they're going to have to deal with the lies. They're going to say, then why did we do this? If the whole purpose was fighting them in Ukraine was to keep them from coming to us, and now the Ukraine thing's over and Russia's not coming to us, why did we do that? So that's going to be one discussion. All the expense that went in there, the economic harm, etc. And then why do we need now to spend hundreds of billions of euros, €1 trillion, to build up this military that you said we need because the Russians are coming, but now they're not coming? And you're going to see nations start to fall apart as the economic impact of the sanctions kick in. The European Union is going to begin to fracture. We've got BRICS coming around the corner here. Turkey is making a big push to become a member of BRICS. What happens if Turkey is invited and they accept? They're a NATO member. Now they are strategically aligned to a Russian, Chinese dominated bloc at a time when NATO is saying our purpose is to confront Russia and Europe and China and the Pacific. Turkey's going, not really. We're the second largest army in NATO. You lose us, all your numbers go to hell. So, and then what happens when Hungary decides to follow suit? Not just the Eurasian member of NATO, but a European member, Central Europe. What happens if Slovakia decides that maybe NATO's not the way it wants to go? What happens when Serbia says EU isn't in our future, BRICS is in our future? What happens when a big chunk of Central Europe goes over to BRICS? It begins a process that we don't know what the outcome would be, but it's not going to be good for Europe and it's not going to be good for NATO. So the sooner Europe and NATO can nip this Ukrainian disaster in the bud to try and bring this thing to a controlled crash, the better. And in order to do that, they're going to have to learn to start to tell Zelensky not just no, but hell no. And they're going to have to stop doing this escalatory business. I mean, to have the Dutch sit there and say, oh, we give you permission to use our F-16s to strike deep inside Russia. Why? What is the purpose of that? It's not going to have any impact on this. The war was not going to be changed. All you're doing is creating a bigger problem for you because, Russia is going to win this war. There's no doubt about it. And, you're committing yourself down a political path where there's going to be a lot of accounting for actions taken. And giving Ukraine at this late state of the game F-16s and saying you have a green light to bomb Russia, that just guarantees that the price Ukraine is going to pay is very harsh. I did an interview with a Russian platform, Lenta.ru, a very big online platform, and we talked about what's going to happen when this war ends, how all this comes to an end, and talked about the future of Russia, talked about Russian West Russian relations and how is this going to be repaired. And the answer is, if the West continues to make these ridiculously aggressive moves, Russia's not in the business of invading the West, but Russia could very well play a big role in rebuilding the West and helping the West out economically, et cetera. But if you continue to alienate Russia, Russia's got BRICS. Russia's got the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Russia's pivoting east, and the hubris of Europe to say, well, Russia will always come back to us. That's like a wife divorcing her husband and say, but he'll come back. He'll come back. I know he'll come back. And when the husband's off, dating the next trophy wife, and she's left. I mean, it's Europe is literally committing suicide right now as we speak. Not because Russia's going to hurt Europe, but Europe's just killing itself with its own bad policies.
One other thing, I know a guy who's Ukrainian, and I've talked to him extensively. And what he said was, he says his family back there, they're Banderists, and he doesn't even really talk to his mother or some other people in his family because they're brainwashed Banderists. And here's what he says: he says, "I will guarantee you this, that at the conclusion of this, there's going to be some kind of a civil war in Ukraine." He said that the Banderists will be angry because they didn't get their way. He said, but there's going to be people that are furious because their church is closed down, furious because they couldn't speak this language, or you know what I mean? That the crackdown on people by the government was so bad that two things. Number one, massive refugee crisis. And number two, internal strife and civil war is going to be bad. And here's a person who grew up, who lived, he talks about his life there and where he's from and family members and all that. Your thoughts on that coming from a person who is Ukrainian?
Yeah, I think one of the big problems that Russia is going to face, sometimes winning doesn't solve all your problems because there are consequences. And the Russian victory, there's the old Pottery Barn rule, you broke it, you own it. Russia owns Ukraine. I know people are going to say, well, NATO broke it. NATO ain't going to rebuild Ukraine. NATO's going to dump Ukraine. The European Union's going to dump Ukraine. This was never about doing the right thing for Ukraine. The only nation that actually cares about Ukraine is Russia because of the historical and cultural, religious, linguistic connectivity. Russia has two conditions for conflict termination. Denazification. And, I know in the West, we're like, well, the Russians are blowing this out of proportion. No, they're not. They're not blowing this out of proportion. The influence of Stepan, when you have the Ukrainian military at every graduation ceremony sing Stepan Bandera is our father, and that's their theme song. When every children's camp that exists in Ukraine is controlled by the Banderists, and they use this as a place where they promote Banderist ideology to all the youth. When you can't do anything in Ukraine without getting a threat from the Banderists, if you deviate one iota, Ukraine is a Banderist-controlled state. They go out of their way to disguise it, and the West goes out of their way to disguise it as well. The Azov, organization has three brigades now. And these are important brigades. There's the 3rd Assault Brigade. They don't call it the Azov Battalion anymore. It's the 3rd Assault Brigade. This is one of their elite units that's everywhere doing everything. It's a pure Azov neo-Nazi unit. They have, I think it's the 12th Territorial Brigade. It's another Azov unit. Then they have the Kraken brigade, which is affiliated with Ukrainian intelligence. And the Kraken guys are, they do horrible things. They commit ethnic cleansing, murder. They are the guys that are behind the lines that shoot Ukrainian soldiers as they retreat. Azov is everywhere. And this isn't that you have right sector, you have the Sloboda, all of whom have created their own units. Right sector has, is now the 64th Mechanized Brigade, and they have other territorial units. We're talking about a significant portion of the Ukrainian military apparatus being hardcore, dedicated Banderists, and they influence everything. And so this poison insinuates itself throughout the airborne forces. Again, they went to England, received training from the British. They were on parade in a British military barracks, graduating, singing songs to Bandera. I think this was the 81st Brigade. So the idea that this isn't a Banderas-controlled country is absurd in the extreme. And as you look at Ukraine collapse, what were some of the big political parties and movements? You had of course Yanukovych's group that was more Russian oriented, Russian speakers. Well, they've pretty much all defected to Russia. So you've lost that core, and they played a very important role in propping up this. You have Zelensky's party, but it's been fractured, shut down, and taken over by Azov ideologists. You have the other parties that have been closed down. And so when we talk about the future of Ukraine, what will rise from the ashes? If left to its own volition, let's say Ukraine concedes defeat and Zelensky is removed, left to its own volition, the only politically viable force in Ukraine are the Banderists. And they would, of course, disguise themselves and come back. And Russia will not let that happen. Russia made several mistakes in its history, the Soviet Union. One of the mistakes was in the incorporation of these territories. They didn't suppress sufficiently Banderist ideology early on. Then, when in 1939, acquiring these territories, then the Germans invaded. This was their chance in the liberation of these territories to totally eradicate Banderas. I mean, they fought almost 10 years to do this. They drove hundreds of thousands off into diaspora. Many of them are living right down here in Ellenville, New York, where they have their little Banderas camp where they brainwash Ukrainian American children every year by the hundreds to carry Stepan Bandera's portrait and sing songs to glorify him, and Roman Shushkevich and the others who they put on the pedestal in their Heroes Hill here in America, right there. But they also were sent to the Gulag in large numbers. In 1954, 1955, Khrushchev released them and said, hey, come back into society. You're a political prisoner. And these Banderas went back to Ukraine and began to recapture Ukraine. And the CIA funded them from 1954 up until 1990. After 1990, the CIA handed off that to the National Endowment for Democracy and its various organs to continue to promote this Banderist ideology. And it was the Banderas that served as the core fighters in the 2014 coup d'etat. People don't realize that the 2014 coup d'etat wasn't the first time there was an attempted coup in there. The 2004-2005 election that actually Viktor Yanukovych won, but then the United States and Europe and the Banderists kicked him out, put in Yushchenko. And what did the first thing Yushchenko did? Elevate Stepan Bandera and Roman Shushkevich to heroes of Ukraine, saying these guys are the heroes of Ukraine. 2010, Yanukovych came back, and that triggered yet another, the 2014 activity. This is a cycle of political violence that the United States has been responsible for in promoting the Banderists. And now they're there. Russia has to eradicate them. This is the reality that people aren't, that it hasn't sunk in yet. And this relates to what Ukraine is going to look like. Right now, no decision has been made by Putin about additional territories. You haven't heard an official statement from the Russian government that Odessa will be Russian, Kharkov will be Russian, Sumy will be Russian. There's a lot of assumptions being made. There's a lot of emotional speculation out there, especially amongst the pro-Russian crowd and Russians who are saying Odessa is a Russian city. Even Putin has said Odessa is a Russian city. Show me the policy that says that Odessa will be a Russian city. No such policy exists because it runs in the face of Russia's official diplomatic posture, which is this is not a war about territorial acquisition. We're not here to try and dismember Ukraine. We were compelled to take over Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk because of the terrorist activities of the Ukrainian government against the Russian speakers. The same with Crimea. And that's an irreversible act. It will not, there was no going back from this. But I did an interview with a former prime minister of Ukraine who has now gone into Russia, and he's participating in what is a government in exile, hoping the Russians plan the future. And I talked about Kharkov and Odessa in particular, but also Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Mykolaiv, this is the economic heart of Ukraine. If these territories leave, Ukraine's got nothing, literal nothing. And I said, how can Russia give Odessa back to Ukraine? Allow Ukraine to retain it, because from Odessa, Ukraine threatens Crimea, threatens Krasnodar, and it's not just theoretical threats. We've seen it happen. It's a fist pointing at Crimea and in Krasnodar. Russia could never allow this to remain in Ukraine as long as Ukraine has the potential of, slipping away from Russia's orbit. So the question now is, what will post-conflict Ukraine look like? Will it be the totality of it firmly in the Russian orbit, totally under Russian control? And what I mean by that is something similar to what the relationship is with Belarus, with political and economic union. An ostensibly independent country, sovereign nation, but at the end of the day, it's not gravitating away from Russia's orbit. It's not going to the EU. It's married to Russia. If Ukraine is, if you're able to do this, then Odessa and Kharkov and these other places can remain part of Ukraine, because now it's not a threat. But if there's going to be any semblance of Ukrainian independence, and the reason why it isn't automatic that Russia will say no to this. I mean, Russia will, of course, dictate that you can't be part of NATO, you'll be neutral, etc. But what it will take for Russia to actually go in and defeat the Banderists, to crush that ideology, is a lot of resources, a lot of time that Russia may not be ready, willing, and able to invest. And so then the question is, how do you preempt future problems out of Ukraine? And that is you take Odessa, you take Kharkov. Sumy, if you're using this logic, is dead, because from Sumy they attack Kursk. And again, people don't understand in the West. We go, well, it's just Kursk. Kursk it's holy land, sacred land. This is where the Nazi beast was broken. Russians don't treat this lightly at all. They understand what happened here. NATO invading Russia using the Ukrainian proxy at Kursk. And you see the Germans gloating, we've been here before, and you hear people like Gary Kasparov, working for MI6, and Mikhail Khodorkovsky, bragging about, Germany, you let us down once, do not let us down again. I'm like, what are you saying? When did they first let you down? You're implying that because Germany lost to the Soviet Union in World War II, that they let you down? That Germany should have won? I mean, this is the whole sickness that's going on. And the Russians get it. The Russians are listening to this. The Russians understand this. This is why if the Russians get into the land grabbing game, meaning that we have to secure territory to protect ourselves, Sumy's gone. You don't get to launch an invasion from Sumy into Kursk and walk away from that. Just like you don't get to launch an invasion from Kharkov into Belgorod and walk away from that. You don't get to launch attacks from Odessa into Crimea and Krasnodar in southern Russia and get away with that. So I think this is some political decision making that has yet to be either made or announced by Russia, which direction they're going to go. But either way, we come down to what you said. There will be violence. When this war ends, there will be violence. First of all, the Ukrainians will police themselves. At the end of the Second World War, a lot of Ukrainians ended up in what they call displaced person camps, DP camps, in Germany, guarded by the United States, guarded by the British. Read the histories of this. I've gone back and read, American accounts. And basically, the Americans, all they did is secure the perimeter. Inside, the Banderists took control, and they just killed everybody. Anybody who was on the wrong side, anybody who said, they just died. They'd hold courts, they die, and the bodies would stack up, and the Americans would come in and remove the bodies and bury them. There will be accounting, and this time, though, it'll be the Banderists who will be held accountable. This will be the Zelensky acolytes who brought all this. The Ukrainians will never forgive the Zelensky government for what it's done. Never. They'll never forgive the generals who Syrski's a dead man walking. Zaluzhny's a dead man walking. All of these generals who have been leading them to this conflict will never be forgiven, and they will never forgive the Banderists. And there will come a time when the Banderists will have to flee Ukraine or be hunted down and given street justice by the Ukrainians who are sick. If you're a military commissar and you're out there rounding up boys right now, you're dead. This is the reality. This is the future of Ukraine. Now, how do you allow this to happen? Is it's going to happen, but how it unfolds is a question. I think Russia's going to want to have sort of clean hands on this one, but that means that they have to impose a pro-Russian Ukrainian government in place that then will be responsible for managing the post-conflict violence. But it will be violence. You cannot denazify Ukraine without physically removing the Banderists, physically removing them. And the day of putting in the gulag is over. So I think the Banderists will be given one of two options: stay and die, or leave and live. But the idea that the Banderists are going to be able to stay in Western Ukraine and just go quiet and go underground, that isn't going to happen. The names are known, the affiliations are known, the addresses are known, and they'll be hunted down and killed. And I'm not promoting this. I'm not gleeful about this. I'm just stating, if you want to look at what I think Western Ukraine is going to look like in a post-conflict, go look at what happened in Czechoslovakia at the end of World War II. Go to Prague. Take a look at what happened. The Germans, when they took over, the whole big part of Czechoslovakia became became part of Germany, got incorporated in, and German families moved there, bought houses, bought homes, lived there, millions of them. And when the war ended, they were told, go or die. And there's videos out there of entire neighborhoods of German families being taken out, lined up against the wall, men, women, children, and machine gunned down by the thousands, actually by the millions by the time it was done. The rivers that went through Czechoslovakia were filled with bodies. The bodies, the Danube bodies would just float down there because that's where the Czechs dumped them. Horrible retribution. Can you blame the Czechs after being occupied by the Germans, treated the way they were, etc.? I'm just telling the Banderists right now, that's your fate. You are the Germans in Czechoslovakia. And if you stay, you're going to be lined up against the wall and machine gunned down. That's your fate, every single one of you. So you might as well start heading off to Ellenville, New York. There's a group of American Ukrainians that'll take. Canada's very friendly to you Nazi types. Maybe they'll take you in. Germany seems to like you. You can go hang out in Munich and visit the gravesite of Stepan Bandera, unless you're a senior guy, because then what'll happen is you'll get somebody spraying cyanide in your face as you walk up the stairs too. Just October 15th was Bandera Death Day. Should become an international holiday to celebrate the demise of this guy. But that's the fate. I think you're right. We're looking at a period of political violence in a post-conflict Ukraine. It has to happen because these Banderists, these Zelenskyites, these war criminals, they can't be allowed to exist.
I'll add this, and I think it's important. This is an important conversation now that people are talking about the end of the conflict. At the end of the conflict, you're going to have, I believe, massive refugee crisis, millions and millions of refugees flowing into Europe for two reasons. Number one, because, as you said, you got the Banderas issue and you got political violence, internal strife, civil war, things of that nature. Number one. Number two, they're going to be hungry and their infrastructure's wrecked. Their, options for getting. And meanwhile, the European people are going to be looking at their government saying, all right, we got a bunch of refugees here, send them back. Well, sorry, that train's going to be coming in the other direction by the millions. The only people that can bail them out are in Moscow. The only way for the Europeans to get anything to resolve this, to help themselves to stop, they're going to have to say to the Russians, help. Help, help, help. We got millions of these people flowing in. A lot of them are really pissed at us and very heavily armed. And that a lot of them are going to look at the West, Europe, and say, "You bastards, you're the ones that did this to us, not the Russians." We've already heard Alexei Arestovich say, perhaps we bet on the wrong horse, right? You're going to have a lot of them look at the West and say, U.S., Europe, you did this to us. They're going to be flowing into Europe, angry, heavily armed, hungry, tired and hungry. And the Russians are going to be trying to say, all right, we're going to try to fix things on our border as best we can. Western Europe and maybe even the U.S. is going to have to go to the Russians and say, you got to help us. This is a disaster for us. We have no way out, because we already know from the U.S., when the people at home are suffering and they see a bunch of refugees, immigrants, whatever you call them, coming in, they're going to look at their leaders and say, we barely got food. Screw this. Your thoughts on that, Scott?
When this war first started and they started talking about Ukrainian refugees, I made a couple statements, and you can go back and you can check it. But I said, the crime that's being done here is to the Ukrainian people. And I said, the future of the Ukrainian women is become the sex slaves of Europe. You're going to become the mainstay of the European sex industry. The future of the Ukrainian children is that you too will fall victim to the worst aspects of European society. You'll be sucked in there, child labor, the child sex trafficking, all this. And the men, your lives will be useless. You're going to either be consigned to menial labor. So you're going to be the workforce, the guys out there digging trenches and all this stuff, or organized crime.
Or you're already dead because they're wiping, most of them out on on the front lines.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm talking about if you survive. If you go to Europe, Europe will not receive you and keep you. Europe hates you, despises you. You should have learned that back at the end of World War II. There's a reason why you were put in displaced person camps, because even Germany wasn't going to absorb you. I remember growing up in the 70s in Germany, and I got a job at a one of those summer jobs you get when you're a high school kid.
Yep.
And it was at the veterinarian. It's military veterinarian, and you're thinking, oh, you get to handle puppies, and that's what I thought when it said you're to report to the veterinarian. I'm like, oh, great, I get to be the guy that holds the dog when it gets its vaccines. Nope, I was sent to a meat packing plant because veterinarians inspect all the meat that gets sold at the commissary. So I went to this giant refrigeration plant where my job was to offload the trucks that brought in the big slabs of meat, put them in the freezer where they get inspected, and then move them back so they could be shipped out. The people that ran that meatpacking plant were a labor battalion of displaced persons. These were people who were children at the end of World War II, couldn't get resettled anywhere. And so they stayed in Germany. And throughout Germany, you had these, some of them were security guards at the gate, some of them, but many of them were it was a labor battalion. They lived in barracks, and they hated me coming in there because, I'm a threat to their meal ticket and all that stuff. And anyway, that's a different story, but they were there, and I got to talk. Eventually, I'll just tell you, they tried to kill me. They locked me into the meat locker, and I was going to freeze to death. And one of them said, "You can't kill an American kid. We can't do that." So then they brought me out, and then when I confronted the guy, he pulled out a big meat cleaver and wanted to have a fight there, and I fought him. 17-year-old kid, went in, punched him in the face, and I guess I won his respect at that point in time. So we put the meat cleaver down, and then they took me to their dining facility and they talked to me and all. But I got to talk to them about their experiences and all this stuff, and they just said, "Look, we're here because nobody wants us. I mean, we grew. This is our life." They literally were slave labor at World War II. Children of people were brought in, or children who lost their parents in the war, who were gathered up and put in these camps, and nobody wanted them. And as they grew into adulthood, they needed jobs. And so the American occupation forces organized them into labor battalions, and it just became part of the system. These labor battalions existed until these guys retired and went away. But it's a tragic story. And many of them were Polish and many of them were Ukrainian. And the reason why I bring this up is Any Ukrainian, and Ukrainians have learned this now, nobody wants you. Nobody likes you because you're unlikable. You're not nice people. You have this superiority complex that somehow because you're Ukrainian, you deserve everything to be thrown at you. You don't have any viable skill set. You're not oriented towards democracy. Many of you are just organized criminals. That's what you've been doing for the last, because that's how Ukraine operates. With a veneer of law, but underneath is nothing but black marketeering, organized crime, smuggling, the whole thing. That's the Ukrainians. And then you come into Europe and you fall into your worst habits. And so the men, you've got no future there. You will either be criminals or you'll be menial laborers. The women, get used to prostitution, baby. That's your life. That's all you're going to be able to do, prostitution. And the children, they'll never have education. They'll never have a normal life. If they avoid being sex trafficked, then they're just going to grow up to be, sort of the new gypsy class of Europe.
Yeah.
Nobody likes you, and it's going to happen. It's already happening. And Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, there was just a fantastic bit of research done about him. He's the mayor, and he runs brothels. And he runs almost all the major brothels in Kiev. He lives above two of the major brothels. His job is 100% sex trafficking, and he does it to serve all the noble Western mercenaries that go into Ukraine. We're here to fight for the Ukrainian people. We're here because you're there because you can have sex anytime you want with desperate Ukrainian women who are desperate to survive. That's it. You're there for the sex. You're there for the drugs. You're there for the alcohol. You're there for the lifestyle that makes you somehow feel relevant. But all it does is certify you as a criminal. But Klitschko runs this, but he also traffics the excess women into Europe. And they say 50% of the prostitutes in Europe are Ukrainian women. 50% of the prostitutes throughout Europe are Ukrainian women. And the children get involved in things you don't even want to know about.
Right.
I'm talking about things that are worse than sex trafficking. The organ trade for unaccounted children who don't have parents. Nobody's looking out for them. Nobody's going to ask any questions. These children are literally being put into factories where they are butchered and their organs are sold and their carcasses are disposed of as you would dispose of animal carcasses. This is the reality that's happening, right? And it's going to get worse because this winter is an unsurvivable winter for millions of Ukrainians. And they will be trying to flee to Europe. And this will be a huge crisis for Europe that already has an immigration problem, can't absorb anybody, isn't politically ready to absorb more Ukrainians, and can't economically do it. We're talking about a humanitarian disaster that hasn't been seen of this scope and scale since the end of the Second World War, when millions of people were fleeing and stuff. People don't talk about those times. People starved to death. The winter of 45, 46, people starved to death, not just in Europe. Go to the Soviet Union. Because of the consequences of this war, people going back, those were very tough winters. People starved to death. People froze to death. It wasn't, oh, we won the war, everything's wonderful. It was, we won the war, but man, we have to deal with the fact that the Nazis destroyed everything. Our agriculture has been destroyed. If you have, a bad, crop year, which they did, and suddenly food shortages at a time when there's food shortage, the German prisoners of war under American control, there's estimates that over 1 million of them starved to death under America because we couldn't feed them. We didn't have any food for them. And the German people, the same thing. This is the future of Ukraine. For all you idiots out, this is where I get furious. All you idiots that put the Ukrainian flag on your social media, I stand with you. Just condemned a nation to death. You condemned a nation to death. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? Nothing, because you weren't sincere in your love of Ukraine. All you ignoramuses who didn't study the history of Ukraine, didn't study who you were supporting. You just went, oh, Putin, Russia, bad. Let's go for Ukraine. The only nation that's going to save Ukraine is Russia. And that's the saving grace. And you better hope that Russia has a good harvest. You better hope that Russia will be able to divert the hundreds of thousands of tons, millions of tons of food supplies to Ukraine to keep your pathetic people from starving to death. That the Russians were able to come in with the medicines necessary. And, that's asking a big ask from Russia. You Ukrainians invaded Kursk. 120,000 Russians have been evacuated. Their homes have been destroyed. In the Donbass, as Russia reconquers these territories and brings them under the control, they have to rebuild the cities and towns and villages that have been destroyed because of your actions, Ukraine. And that should be Russia's number one priority, and it will be Russia's number one priority. And so now you want Russia to divert resources away from rebuilding the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, rebuilding Kursk, restoring aspects of Belgorod because of your deprivations, Ukraine. And now you want Russia to come in and save you? They will, because that's Russia. That's the reality of Russia. These are good people with a good government, and their heart's in the right place, and they still somehow believe that you're their brothers, that you're their cousins, that you are fellow Slavs. And so they will come to your assistance. They will help you. Not Europe, though. Not the United States. Don't expect anything from them. Your best bet if you're a Ukrainian is to stay in Ukraine, ride it out, and pray for the Russians to come.
Let's move over. Well, let's move to a couple of different places. Something I'm going to connect. The Israelis are saying we're going to attack Iran. Iran says if you do, you're going to get it. But here's something that I connect because China gets a lot of energy from Iran, and so they have a stake in the game. Russia understands the importance of Iran, geostrategic and geographical importance of Iran and its connections. Syria, where Russia has 2 important bases, and of course, and on and on. Okay, so as the U.S. and its proxy Israel threatens Iran, something interesting happens. The Chinese decide they're going to surround Taiwan and just kind of practice. A while back, Ray McGovern said, if things get too dusted up in Ukraine or get a little too hot somewhere else, don't be surprised if the Chinese don't start making some noise around Taiwan. If I were the government of Taiwan, which is, talking this independence crap, I'd be concerned because the Chinese are very different than the Russians. You know what I mean? And the Chinese, how martial arts goes. You try to avoid a fight, but if you got to fight, you hit them with everything you have. Any self-defense is you try to avoid a fight, but if you got to fight, you try to pummel your opponent mercilessly until they can't get up. There's not going to be, there will be, if it's China and Taiwan, there will be no slow and incremental attack. The Chinese will flatten everything, every base. They will do a decapitation strike on the leadership. They will end it in hours. And they're making noise. Your thoughts, am I wrong connecting these things?
No, you're 100% correct. China has said from day one that they will bend over backwards to achieve the peaceful unification of China, to bring Taiwan back into the fold where China believes it always has belonged. And so does the United States. That's why we have a one China policy. We've committed to that. The whole world has. Nobody has committed to an independent Taiwan. But we're doing that now because it was a gambit. We were using Taiwan, and this is something for all the Taiwanese people to understand. We don't care about you. Please, please, please look at the Ukrainians. We don't care about you. We don't like you even. We use you. That's all you are. You're a commodity to be used by us for this geopolitical chess game. And, we sold you away. Remember when you were our big allies, Kuomintang? Because when China was part of the Big Five, it wasn't the Communist Party that was part of the Big Five. It was Chiang Kai-shek. But then you got beat by the Chinese Red Army, the People's Liberation Army, and you had to flee. And you fled to Taiwan. But we rallied with you. We were there with you. Were we? Because we abandoned you the second we thought that we'd get a bigger bang for our buck out of communist China. When we decided that, no, let's jump ship, and because we're going to try and convert those communists into capitalists. That was the big plan. And we dumped you. We abandoned you immediately. But it was just a political game because we weren't really serious. We didn't know how it was going to end with China. So we parlayed our damn, we hedged our bets, and we kept this connectivity with Taiwan, and now that connectivity, we're exploiting that to create the impression that we that we aren't going to support the unification. We're going to use the threat of Taiwanese independence as a way of destabilizing China and having control over it. And the Chinese are like, we're not playing that game. I don't know what part of no you don't understand. When the time comes, if we decide that the peaceful unification is no longer possible because people are acting in a way that tries to make Taiwan independent, we will choose the military option. And the military option isn't going to be the special military operation. What people don't understand is that Russia could have won this war very, very quickly had they gone to war with Ukraine. They didn't. They initiated a special military operation, which is a completely different operation. Things happened. Things didn't happen that should have happened. If it was a war, the approach wasn't to occupy or actually physically defeat Ukraine. The approach was to compel Ukraine to the negotiating table. 6 days after the special military operation began, Ukraine was at the negotiating table. For all you people out there who said that the Russians failed, 6 days after the special military operation began, Ukraine was at the negotiating table. And in a little more than a month, Ukraine had signed off on the Istanbul communique, which was a peace agreement. It was just the intervention of NATO that blocked. So the Russians did everything right. They made tactical errors. Sure, they did. I mean, you don't go rushing in like you did. There were some intelligence failures. But the Russians achieved their strategic purpose. They got Ukraine to the table and got the peace agreement that met all of Russia's requirements, initialed off on, and it should have been signed, and that would have been the end of it. But that didn't happen. China's not playing that game. First of all, China's looked at that experience, and they've also taken a look at, one of the big question marks of China is, what about the ballistic missile defense shield? Will it hold? Now they know. Saturation. China can eliminate Taiwan in 48 hours. 48 hours of sustained ballistic missile strikes against critical infrastructure in Taiwan, against the command and control, against military, eliminates it. That China can strangle Taiwan anytime it wants with a naval blockade that the U.S. can't break, is incapable of breaking. Taiwan will be politically defeated in a week's time. Once the People's Liberation Army starts pouring ashore, after they destroy everything, it's over. The Taiwanese people will throw down their hands and say, "Yep, we are part of this." It's inevitable. Will there be people that run to the mountains? Yeah, there will be some fanatics that go to the mountains, but they'll be hunted down, they'll be killed. The Chinese have been planning this for a long time. They understand how these conflicts work, and they're not going to be playing games. So I think this is the big lesson that the West needs to understand, that there will be no drawn out conflict for Taiwan. That the moment China decides that this is a military problem and they're going to apply a military solution, that is the end of Taiwan. There will be no games played. There will be decapitation of leadership. There will be destruction of military capacity, and there will be destruction of selective infrastructure that's designed to shut down Taiwan. So that's the future. That's the lesson that Taiwan learned from the Ukraine conflict. Because I think China was a little uncertain about how to proceed, but now they understand the political games. If you give the West a chance to respond to if you don't present the West with a fait accompli, but you go into this slow moving thing, the West will adjust, react, and drag this thing out, as what happened with Russia in Ukraine. If you confront the West, it's over. Tell America, while America's still trying to mobilize the brigades, get them up, get them equipped, get them on ships, get them moving across the Pacific, China's got the flag raised over Taipei saying, it's over. It's done. We own it. That's what's going to happen. That's my assessment.
Yeah, I agree. At the point they take it, look, what is it? Possession is 9/10 of the law. You've got now, they have Taiwan, they're occupying Taiwan, and you recognize Taiwan as part of China. How can you argue to the world, we're going to go in and free Taiwan? Well, you can't. So it's game, set, and match. And if China looks and you start a real bad dust up in the Middle East, that's cover for them. That's military and political cover where you're involved in whatever in the Middle East. Your thoughts on, there's a lot of woofing going on by the Israelis. This is which is about a time, so I'll make this the last thing. A lot of, oh yes, we're going to do this and that to the Iranians. And there was a question, will they do it without the Americans? Well, we already know it's too far away. They can't do it without the Americans. And even if they do, there's electronic warfare systems there in Russia. There's S-400s. There are significant defensive capabilities. The question I keep asking is, what would happen if they say, well, we're going to attack and all their stuff gets shot down, or they take a beating just from the attack, not even from the response? And I tend to think that if there's S-400s, S-300s, all kinds of an integrated air defense, just the attack alone is not going to be easy, Scott. And we'll make this the last thing. I know you got to go.
Well, I'll be here as long as you need me. I was late, so I owe you, man. Look, the Israelis are casualty averse. They learned from Yom Kippur, because the only way the Israelis stopped the Syrian advance out of the Golan Heights, through the Golan Heights down into Galilee, was by basically using their aircraft as artillery. And so the Israeli pilots, highly trained pilots flying expensive aircraft, were just thrown in there to bomb, and they lost a lot of aircraft. They lost a lot of pilots. And they said, we're not going to do that again. That isn't our preferred way of operating. Whenever an airplane is shot down, it's a big problem for the Israelis, because they plan their operations to avoid that very possibility. So the idea that they're going to flood into Iran helter skelter and open themselves up to taking casualties, that's just not the way the Israeli Air Force operates. So I do think whatever attacks they do will be very constrained by the absolute requirement not to lose a pilot. Remember, they lost a Rod, I think his name is, a pilot they lost in Lebanon who's still unaccounted for. The belief is Hezbollah had him, turned him over to the Iranians and all that, but he's still unaccounted for. And this is a huge issue for the Israelis. Could you imagine Israel going in and losing a half dozen F-35s and having 5 of those pilots get captured and paraded downtown Tehran by the Iranians? Israel doesn't want that. That's a defeat. Whatever they accomplished with their bombs, they just lost by having pilots paraded down, Main Street, Tehran. So I think the Israelis will go out of their way to avoid taking hit, but that limits the impact of whatever military operation that they're running against the Iranians. And this is the problem. Israel can't do it without the United States. And so what Israel's trying to do is come up with the conditions that will lure the United States into this. But it's a big gamble for Israel, because for this to happen, they will have to do a strike against Iran and then hope that Iran strikes back with just enough power to convince America they have to intervene on behalf of Israel to save Israel, but not so much power that Israel suffers a fatal wound. I mean, it's like going into a knife fight. I'm going to get into a knife fight, and Garland, I know I can't win this knife fight unless you jump in with me. So I'm going to go in there and tickle the guy, and then I'm going to hold him off. Maybe he cuts me here, but I need you to come in, Garland. But if by the time you decide to jump in, he's already pierced my heart, slit my throat, and I'm on the ground bleeding out, why get in the knife fight to begin with? Israel has to avoid the situation where Iran deals Israel fatal damage. And Iran can do this. Iran knows this. Fortunately for the Israelis, the Iranians are smart. And, they understand that there are consequences for every action. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Newton's third law of physics applies to geopolitics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And if you want to minimize the reaction, your action needs to be mitigated. So I don't think Iran's going to fall into this trap. And they haven't so far. Look at the 2 attacks that they've done against Israel. Carefully calibrated attacks designed to make a point, not to deal damage. And I depending on what Israel does with its attacks, I think Iran has another mitigation attack in them. And why do I say that? did you see the strange announcement that came from the Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson the other day? We're cutting off all talks with America. And I'm like, you guys were talking to America? You know, if that was happening. I mean, everybody knows it's probably happening, but it's
Yeah.
like Iran's admitting that they were talking to America. And they were basically doing negotiations via intermediary. It's the same way that the Iran nuclear deal began. It began with Jake Sullivan and another person flying into Qatar and working with the Iranians to set up the conditions for the Iran nuclear deal. Iran was talking to the United States through an intermediary because the United States was trying to create the conditions for Israel to launch a face-saving strike against Iran, and Iran not overreacting, even though Iran has said one bomb, we come in with everything. And apparently, the Iranians had agreed to an arrangement. But the key to this is that it's never talked about, meaning it just happens. And everybody walks away. Nobody understands that, there was all this negotiating going on. But the United States is incapable of keeping anything secret, especially in politicized events. And the negotiations were leaked, I think, to the Wall Street Journal that ran an article that talked about just this, that Iran has agreed to receive a limited Israeli strike and not respond. Now, that puts Iran in a horrible position because the Iranian government can't admit this. That's the whole idea of secret negotiations. And so the Iranians have said, screw you, we're done. We're not talking to you anymore. Does that mean that the deal's done? We don't know because we're not talking to them anymore. So now it's a gamble. Will Israel agree to a limited strike because the United States says at one time Iran agreed to not overreact, or how can the United States guarantee that outcome? I think there's one of the reasons why there's this long pause taking place is that Israel is faced with the uncertainty of knowing what the consequences of their action will be. They don't have the ability to knock Iran out with one punch, not even close. All they can do, excuse my language, piss Iran off. And the question is Iran willing to absorb this and then not do anything? Or will Iran come back? And then at what stage will the United States be compelled to intervene at all? I don't think the United States politically can allow Israel to be destroyed. And Iran has that capability to do that. But the United States also doesn't have the ability to follow through with meaningful attacks. I mean, we can't get engaged in a existential struggle with Iran. We can't fight a war to the death with Iran. And so, but once you begin this process, Iran can do a hell of a lot of damage to us. They can literally kill tens of thousands of Americans instantly. All these bases that have no air defense, Iran can put missiles on those bases. Will Iran do that? Probably not. Not designed to kill, because again, Iran understands the consequences would be a long drawn out war at a time when Iran's supposed to be emerging from conflict, emerging from sanctions, engaging with BRICS, Shanghai cooperation for this new economic era of well-being.
They're important to the cause. Yeah, China and Russia is like, the last thing we need right now is with going into Kazan is Iran up geopolitically, strategically, geographically. They're critical to the movement. So I imagine Russia and China is continually giving them incentives, shall we say, to lay low. One thing I'll say this: Iran has become very, very artful at making an attack, having a big light show over Israel and making an attack look like they devastated Israel while they do some damage, but not as big, sending drones and people are seeing things drop out of the sky. I saw these pictures in Israel where it was kind of in a field and there was these big craters, right? So I suspect that did some of those hit buildings or targets, and did they hurt some of their military infrastructure? Yes, but some of those missiles also hit in the middle of the field because those are GPS, they're pinpoint. If they hit in the middle of the field, they were aiming at that damn field. So I think the other advantage that Iran has is they have the ability to respond in a way that looks a lot more devastating than it is, which allows them an out from a PR perspective, where their people will say, we smacked them, where the Muslim community will say, oh, you really let them have it that time. And the Israelis are dealing with the fact that they're looking bad but they weren't hit as hard as it looks.
Yeah, I mean that's what Iran has done in True Promise 1 and True Promise 2, and I think True Promise 3 has that potential. Again, it depends on what Israel decides to strike. Israel's in the business of killing leadership right now. Apparently, they just killed Sinwar in Gaza. According to the news, I looked at some photographs. If it turns out that that's him, then they got him. They got Nasrallah. It's not going to end Hamas. Hamas has been preparing for this potential. There are deputies, and there's deputies, and the resistance will continue. But Israel's in the business of killing people. The United States took out Qasem Soleimani. Israel could very well not strike Iran with a big military demonstration, and yet use its capabilities to kill senior Iranians, the supreme leader, kill the president, kill the speaker of parliament, kill the head of the judiciary, kill the head of the Revolutionary Guard Command. And that may be the direction that we see this conflict head into. The Israelis, going into a more deniable phase of violence designed to decapitate leadership and punish leadership. That's just one alternative. But again, I don't think the Iranians are going to allow Israel to run rampant in Tehran, knocking off Iranian leadership. So it'd be a miscalculation on the part of the Israelis to do that. But Israel's very good at assassination. They've proven that they have the ability to reach out and touch people. What that means in the end, we will find out. I don't think, just like Hezbollah hasn't been defeated by Nasrallah's death, Hamas, I don't believe, will be defeated by Sinwar's death. And Iran will not be defeated by losing. They already lost a president in a helicopter crash. They've recovered. They have the assembly of experts who can immediately, they're charged, the assembly of experts is charged as having somebody already identified to replace the supreme leader. So if you take out the supreme leader, it's not like Iran's going to go, oh no, what do we do? They go, there he is. We already got the guy picked. That's their job. They're charged with doing that. So we're in a very dangerous time where we have people making decisions based upon incomplete information about what the other side is thinking. And we can use that same thing for the United States and Russia over Ukraine. We don't have diplomatic engagement with the Russians anymore, not on a meaningful scale. So we really don't know what Russia's thinking. And Russia's not picking up the phone. Every time America says, hey, Schultz, call Putin and find out what's going on in his brain. Schultz is like, I'm trying. The Russians are like, we ain't taking that phone call. The Russians just not in the business of caring about what the West thinks anymore. They're going to do what Russia's going to do. And BRICS is a big deal. This is a big deal. People should be following what's going on in BRICS. This is a game-changing event. This is one of those things that, I don't know if Bretton Woods, when it happened back in '44, if people knew at that time that, this meeting is going to change the world for decades. Kazan is going to change the world for decades. This is a big deal that's going on right now, a very big deal. And people should be looking at it, if no other reason, to say, I was alive when the world changed. This is going to be one of those fundamental transformative periods of time in world history.
Thank you very much, Scott Ritter. Don't forget, everybody, go to scottritterextra.com. Before we go, Scott, remind people about our event.
We have an event on Sunday, October 27th, 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. From 10 to 11, come in, get your brunch. It's a world-class facility, the Tudor Steakhouse. We've ordered up a great menu. The chef is a great chef. So you're going to get really good food. It's a beautiful venue. I've been there and I'm going again this weekend just to finalize the logistics. It's a beautiful venue. It's comfortable, beautiful, right there in Tudor City, right near the United Nations. And then we're going to have two world-class panels. We have one panel that's on the threat of nuclear war. Then we have another panel that's on the assault on free speech. And we have a whole list of world-class speaker. Garland Nixon will be there. Larry Wilkerson will be there. Dennis Fritz, the head of the Eisenhower Media Center, will be there. Jimmy Dore will be there. Randy Credico will be there. Danny Haiphong will be there. Danny the guy with the podcast whose name I can't.
Russell Dobular.
Russell,
Due Dissidents. Yeah.
Mr. Due Dissidents will be there. Russell, I apologize. I'm just an old senile man. I'll be there. Jeff Norman will be there. And we're just going to put together high class. Diane Sayre and Jose Vega will be there. I'll be moderating the nuclear war panel. Jose Vega will be moderating the free speech panel. Each panel will go about an hour. Great dialogue, and we're going to open it up for questions with the audience. There'll be books on sale if you want them. Again, for the price, it's $100. You get about a $70 meal once you add in gratuity and tax equivalent, and then everybody gets a $20 Operation Dawn Challenge coin. And so for about $10 overhead, you're getting a world-class panel. It's great value, and we look forward to seeing 120 seats. Last time I checked, they're being sold at a nice, crisp rate. But if you want to go on scottritter.com. You'll see the place where you can get the information and buy your ticket online. And I look forward to seeing everybody there.
scottritter.com for all your information. Thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate this. Don't forget, due to lots of restrictions and stuff like that, Scott and I don't have the online social media reach that we probably would like to have. So we will have to count on you. Everybody go on X, go on all your everywhere, all your social media platforms. Please, everyone, do two things. Number one, like and subscribe if you're not subscribed to this channel. Number two, share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.